Okay, this is part 4 of quotes by Frank Smith about education. He says there's two kinds of reading. I call them reading like a reader and reading like a writer. When you read like a reader, you are identifying with the characters in the story. The story is what you learn about. When you read like a writer, you identify with the author and learn about writing. Yeah, so when I'm in the middle of writing a book or I'm trying to learn about writing, I read like a writer, trying to understand how is he putting this all together. But most of the time you read like a reader and just enjoy the story. Frank Smith, he says, schools must recognize that continual testing is intellectual harassment. They do it on purpose. The public schools are designed to make people stupid, to create proles that are just minimum wage employees. The way to hold something into long-term memory is to relate it to something you already know. Yeah, that's how you process something. You connect it to what you already know. Neither comprehension nor learning can take place in an atmosphere of anxiety. Yeah, if you're stressed out, you don't remember school stuff very well. To see what students learn in school, look at how they leave school. If they leave thinking that reading and writing are difficult and pointless, that mathematics is confusing, that history is irrelevant, and that art is a bore, then that is what they have been taught. Yeah, they intentionally make them read the worst books as freshmen in high school. No freshman should be forced to read Great Expectations, Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye. They're not ready for Julius Caesar. All of that stuff is essentially nonsense to a first-year student, and it makes them hate reading. Most people never read another book the rest of their life. And it's designed to do that. They wanted them to do that. That's the worst Charles Dickens book. People learn what is demonstrated to them, and this will not change to suit the convenience of education administrators. The more they emphasize testing in school, you'll notice the stupider the students get. If you just let them read things that they're interested in, they'll keep getting smarter. That's why people were smarter in the 1800s. That's one of the reasons. Okay, let's see here. Learning always involves feelings. We remember how we feel when we learn. Yeah, when you have a good teacher, learning is fun. Like think about when you have a good coach in your sport, wrestling or some other sport. It's kind of fun. It's enjoyable. You can't wait to go to practice. And now that all junk learning can be delivered by computers, if you're just going to go with program junk learning, who needs teachers? Okay, and then he said when he was teaching, he would sometimes have a friend of his in the classroom who would intentionally argue with him because that helped to create a good dialogue that was more memorable for the students. And then he talks about Benjamin Bloom's hierarchical learning, programmed mastery learning, and how he thought that that was not very good, that he said it was like upside down, what did he say? He said it's making sense was determined by the experimenter rather than the learner. He felt it was a very artificial way to learn. He wasn't impressed by it. And that's kind of one of his big points, is that good learning is personal and it's something we enjoy, and that's how it should be. He says, reading is making sense of things. When you read somebody's face, you're trying to make sense of what might be going on behind the eyes. When you read a story, you try to interpret what it is about to make sense of the story. He says, people claim that burying your nose in a book might cut you off from the world, but it's quite the reverse. Reading enables you to experience what would be impossible in any other way. It enables you to select a world you choose to live in, temporarily at least. If you want to experience the London of Charles Dickens, the Philadelphia of Ben Franklin, the Moscow of Leo Tolstoy, reading will take you there. Yes, that is true. Okay, then he talks about something that he calls identification. He says, what do you mean by identification? To see oneself as someone else, with a resulting feeling of close emotional association. This is sometimes referred to as empathy. But I want to go further, to the limit in fact. I want to regard identification as locating yourself in another person, that a person's experiences are your own. If identification takes place, you are not reading about someone else. You are reading about yourself. You are having the experience. Usually when I read a book, I identify with at least one of the characters. I am sure it is the same for you. Sometimes when I read a book, I identify with the author as if I am writing the book myself. Yeah, the great book, you identify with the people, for whatever the reason. When I read Quo Vadis, I identify with Vinicius initially, then later on with Petronius, okay? When I read Gone with the Wind, I'm like, holy crap, Scarlett O'Hara, she's like my ex-wife. She just plays these men, wraps them around her finger and tricks them. I'm like, gosh, I wish I'd read this book before I got married. You read Jean Valjean in Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. Okay, he's a great character. Anyways, in Brothers Karamazov, at first I felt like Ivan, but later on I identified with Alyosha. All right, so the next quote, he says, identification and prediction are the basis of learning. If you want to learn anything, you have to identify with the kind of person who knows that kind of thing. You have to anticipate what they might be doing. You have to be that kind of person. If you want to learn about exploration, you should think like an explorer. You have to identify with explorers. And I think there's truth in that. And that's why I think teaching should be way more biographical. For example, in biology, when I took biology class, I always thought you just memorize stuff and, hope you do well on the test. But I had a friend who was an A-plus student in biology, and he really liked nature. He wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And he was friends with a professor. And they would go bird watching at Jasper Ridge Nature Center near Stanford. Okay, so I went with him, and we're sitting out there looking at the birds under the binocular, and he starts talking about the personality of the birds. He's like, blue jays are the assholes of the bird world, and he points out all the things the blue jay did, and we saw some of the blue jay behaviors, and then he talked about all the different birds and some of the little tricks they play, how they'll fake a broken wing to distract you away from the nest, and it made it a lot of fun. And he would talk about the different plants, and all of that sort of made it come to life for me, the ecology that we were talking about in the biology class. And I'll just tell you one quick story. You might have heard me say it before, but I was a sophomore at Stanford, in the biology class, and I had gone bird watching with these guys a few times, and I really liked it. And I went over to the Palo Alto Baylands, and I asked them, can I please have your field guide? And they told me, we don't have a field guide. And I looked at them like they were insane, because to me, with hanging around with these serious biologists, for a nature center to not have a field guide was like the bottom of incompetence. And this is, a Stanford-related place. So I was busy off the charts. Varsity starter on the wrestling team, taking really difficult load of classes. And I was like, this is outrageous. And all my little free time, and there was next to none, I wrote an entire field guide of the plants and birds of the Palo Alto Baylands, and then I gave it to them for free because I just thought it was like just a ridiculous insult to civilization to not have a field guide. What I'm trying to say is my personality of wanting to become a wildlife biologist, like my friends who I admired, like the professor who I admired and liked, it made me good at biology. I got an A+ in the class that semester. And, before then I used to get B- in the easy classes. Now I was getting A+ in the hardest classes with all the pre-med red hots. So what I'm trying to say is when you see yourself as in that role of what the class is doing, you get way better at it. When I was in med school, I would always say to myself when I was rotating through something, maybe I'll go into this. Maybe I'll go into pediatrics when I'm rotating in peds. Maybe I'll do OB when I'm in OB. Maybe I'll be a general surgeon when I'm in general surgery. Maybe I'll be, a cardiac surgeon when I'm in cardiac. Whatever I was doing, I would try to talk myself into saying, maybe I'm going to do this. Maybe I'm going to do this. Because what you're doing is you're telling your brain this is important. Pay attention and learn it. And I would always try to get the highest grade in the class on all the tests. I would study to the max with those outline format books because I was pushing myself. I wanted to push. Anyways, hope you found that helpful.